Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of AI Talks. I'm your host, Avi, and my co host here we have today is Gib and also a special guest, Ruth. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Just so everybody knows Avi and Gib, but let's talk a little bit about Ruth. Ruth is the co-founder and head of product and AI at Berrijam. So she and I have been working for the last few years, working on making AI simple and accessible. And she is very, very interested in this space of making AI broadly applicable to as many people as possible. She's previously worked as a data scientist at Microsoft and across multiple teams in product and data science capabilities, including very early product growth in augmented reality space. So think about HoloLens, and also building AI features for Dynamics customer service applications. She is very passionate about problem solving and empowering others to make AI accessible, but also make sure it's done in a responsible way. Welcome, Ruth. Good to have
Yeah,
you.
yeah, thanks. Thanks for that intro.
So, before we get started, I want to make sure that we talk about the theme and focus on this particular episode. Our theme for this particular episode is what is AI? It really not in terms of a technical coding methodology, but more in terms of high level overview. What is AI and what is the role it plays in business? We also want to talk a little bit about how we go about estimating and building a business case around these capabilities for business to adopt this, and then try and bring it back home in terms of different types of capabilities AI has. And we'll along the way pepper different examples and experiences both Ruth and I've had in building these solutions, but also Gib in terms of what you've seen in industry helping organizations adopt it. Um, so let's talk a little bit about what is AI. AI, as we've been defining it, is not just what's in fashion, ChatGPT and LLMs right now. It isn't a fad. It has been around for since the 1950s, growing a large pool of capabilities, from optimization techniques to decision trees to statistical modeling to analytics. The core fundamental part of AI is it's informing some kind of intelligent action, and that action might be very intelligent within the context and constraint of a particular space, right? It could be a smart meter system that's making a very, very simple decision. Instead of saying, is there enough water in the soil? Do I need to turn on the tap? Or did it rain? Is there enough do I expect to see rain in the next 12 hours? And making a simple decision, turning on the tap or not. Or it could be very, very complex in terms of say, how do I personalize the experience of someone who's a customer coming into my website and with the right products and recommendations? Or it could be a business making a decision in its operations, supply chain, logistics, you name it. So common theme is it's decision making, albeit constrained in a particular space. Um, so let's talk a little bit about AI in general, Ruth, in terms of what you have built and seen. Talk about your thoughts on AI and maybe give us a bit of a taste of what you've built.
Yeah, sounds good. So I think, yeah, and I definitely agree with everything that you just said. I think just adding on to that, like the way that I view AI is basically like a set of techniques or tools that enable computers or machines to essentially simulate human intelligence, but often with a lot more efficiency. So things that a human may take months to model different factors and understand how they may impact their business, a computer with the right AI systems may be able to do that within minutes or even seconds in some cases. So yeah, it's not necessarily trying to replace humans in any way, but mostly just to essentially make the processes and everything more efficient.
Mhm.
So there are a couple of projects. I've worked on a lot of projects in different capabilities, as we mentioned before. But there are two in particular that I wanted to talk about.
Mhm.
And the first one is a problem that I think is encountered by pretty much every business out there, and that is understanding customer churn. So the reason why this is like so important is that in general, it's significantly harder to acquire customers than it is to keep them. And so we want to basically try and ensure we're building products and services that retain our customers so they keep coming back. And one product that I worked on this for was the Windows Photos application.
Mhm.
Um, and so what we noticed was that majority of customers who were churning within the first week. And we also pretty much did some analysis to understand why they were churning. And the biggest reason for churn was that these customers didn't have any photos in their library. So when you think about it, this obviously makes sense. Like, what's the point of using a Photos app if you have no photos in your library? But doing this analysis actually helped us understand, amongst all the different factors that led to churn, which was the most important, which one we should prioritize, and then it helped inform us which features we needed to build next. So what we did as a result of this is we basically built a single one-click tool to import all of your photos from another location. And we found that this significantly reduced the churn, and people just continued to use the Photos app because they actually had photos to use in the app. So that's one example of that. But it's, as I said before, it's applicable to so many different businesses. Just understanding all the different factors that will help you keep customers.
Yeah, we certainly had that problem at TrackPhone Wireless. Like, customer churn was a very, very important priority of keeping customers and retaining them. Gib, you've worked with multiple organizations. Have you seen the role customer retention plays in business strategy and outcomes?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what your example, brought to mind, Ruth, is that you're highlighting the difference between sort of just seeing the data and then having something interpret it in a way that points you in the direction that you should be going. And so I think that broadly, as a more of a business and marketing oriented person, seeing AI through that lens is kind of how I view it. And I think it's been viewed, even previous to ChatGPT emerging. So I think that's very important to think about, because it just distinguishes between sort of the reporting of the business versus sort of like, well, what's actually happening here? Because you described that, understanding why churn is happening, what are the factors behind it, what features should be building into the products and things like that. Independent of being able to do that analysis, you wouldn't, you might have to infer those types of things, and then maybe be wrong, as opposed to what you did. So I think that's kind of interesting. As it relates to churn, I mean, as you said, Avi, in the telco space, that's a huge issue, but I mean, it's a big issue in every industry, right? Just because it is, as it was said, it's easier to and less costly to retain your customers. In fact, most companies are making money off of their foundational base of customers, and so keeping them is equally as important. So, in carrying everything forward to the features that they want, that also illustrates how this, world exists. So it's not just about, well, why are customers churning? Well, how do we stop it? Well, a retention offer is great, but also maybe we should be anticipating features and the product that they want so that we can upgrade them to the next thing, and get them to accept that, the new contract, the new whatever. And so it's all sort of woven together this way, into the production of whatever you're producing. And so I think that's an interesting way of thinking about this too. It's not just an isolated project to figure out churn. It's actually, it probably does have an impact on product development design to even, retain and grow the customer base.
I think I hear the Blue Angels back in your background, Ruth, right? So
Yeah, sorry, a little noisy. I might have to mute every now and then.
That's cool.
no worries. So Gib, just on that particular part, when you're sort of formulating this as a problem that's chronic to or important to every business that has customers, right? How do you retain them? How do you understand? But it's not just a one-off thing. It's an iterative process. You keep doing this because every time there's something else. I know seasonality plays a big role in churn amongst prepaid customers, right? Because holiday season, you have a lot more visitors. They buy a prepaid plan, they leave. So understanding that dynamics could help you not chase down unnecessary red herrings as well, right? So understanding that is important. Ruth, back in the domain and application of it, what did you find the most challenging part of even going down this journey? Was it the organization? Was it the leadership? Was it strategy? The technology? What made it really tough?
Yeah, so I think this was done quite a few years ago, and I think at the time there was a lot of resistance to actually accepting the data and accepting what it was telling you. So there was a lot of, at least, kind of conflict between the designers and the product managers and the data team, because the designers were like, this is what we need to build, we want to build this, and then we had this data and we're telling you, actually, this is a higher priority because you're losing a lot of your customers. So having those conversations and trying to change the culture of the team to be more of a data-driven team, that was probably the biggest challenge.
Mm. And how do you go about, like, even the organization? There's, designers say, "I've built the perfect system." Now you've got data scientists coming in and saying, the evidence shows contrary to it.
Yeah.
How do you even go about facilitating this? Do you need a sort of a leadership buy-in, or do you need to look at other strategies? Any strategies that work for you?
Yeah, well, it definitely helped having a leadership buy-in for sure. I think one of the biggest things was making sure that there was an understanding that it's not a me versus you, like a data versus design kind of problem, that we are actually working together. So the designers could come up with multiple ideas, and we could use the data, we could test the multiple different ideas and see which one was actually giving the best results. So it wasn't necessarily, oh, you had to have a design or we had to tell you exactly what to do with the data. It was a collaborative process, and sort of learning about that and educating about that actually helped, facilitate a lot of that change.
Hey Ruth, you said you did this a while ago.
Yeah.
Has the project and the underlying assumptions around it, you believe, may have changed in today's state? Because I asked that question just because, many years ago, telco churn has been an issue for a long time, and so it's
Yeah.
always been something that's probably been subject to various data analyses to understand exactly what's happening. And so, but at the same time, techniques and capabilities and the data sources that can be used to inform those decisions may expand or change because of the availability of what data is being generated by different devices and the like. So I'm just, how do you think it's evolved or improved since you did it?
Yeah, so I think, as Avishka mentioned, this is an iterative process. It's not like, oh, we've solved churn, that's it, we no longer need to deal with it. So, techniques are getting more and more sophisticated. We're getting more and more access to data from different sources, different kinds of data. So essentially, it's just continuing to iterate, continuing to peel the layers, essentially. Okay, this is one factor that's really impacting churn. We're going to fix this, or fix part of it, solve this in however we can, and then peeling the next layer. Then using different techniques to try and experiment and try and understand the next thing that you need to solve. So it's just been really an iterative process.
I mean, for industrial engineers and the engineering profession, is that cool? I mean, are they okay with that? I have this perception that it's things are black and white, binary, in certain disciplines, but software engineering is different and data science is different. But I'm just curious if you saw that.
Well, I personally haven't worked in sort of the industry with engineers. I've really only worked with in the software industry. So what I saw was that, it started to become a lot more acceptable. There was a lot more willingness to change and to learn. But I couldn't really tell you about.
That's okay. I just asked because, a lot of manufacturing companies that I'm familiar with, they tend to lag a lot of other companies in terms of the progressive nature of thinking along these lines. And I'm just curious, how many of them think about these things in light of the fact that experimentation, as Avi has said many times, is so fundamental to doing this stuff and making that part of the process. But then it's about, de-risking it and implementing the right controls and,
And that's the
leadership.
part, Gib, where experimentation is relatively cheap and inexpensive in software and online compared to, like, manufacturing processes, right? So, by the way, experimentation's come a long way, even in manufacturing companies, with the advent of 3D printing and the make, making 3D prints more and more affordable, right, for most organizations, right? So that is a big shift in their strategy as well. So experimentation is making its way, and as you said, right, the idea of how do we do it safely, quickly, is very, very, very important. That most organizations don't realize. A lot of the organizations focus on I've got an AI, but what Ruth has done here is she's capitalized on AI techniques and technology to solve an underlying exploration problem. How do you understand what is going on? Because the impact is business. So AI isn't a product, isn't just a tool or an add-on. It is a capability to go and find or connect the dots. And if you can connect the dots, then you can make predictions about certain things. I like to think of it in that way, which helps frame it, as opposed to, hey, this what algorithm was used. And Ruth, I'm not going to ask you what algorithm you used there, trade secrets and all. But what were the other projects that you worked on when you were at Microsoft?
Yeah, so one of the projects that I think was really interesting was a little more product specific, but again, the techniques used and the general concept can be applied in so many different scenarios. And this was, I helped build a knowledge-based recommendation system for customer service agents. So essentially, when agents were speaking with customers, we would take that conversation and essentially recommend articles and similar cases that have already been resolved to help them solve their problems more efficiently and ideally provide a better customer experience. So yeah, as I mentioned,
Give us a
this is
concrete example of what that workflow might look like for the.
okay. So an example is a customer, his Xbox is broken, their Xbox is broken, they call up the customer service, and the customer service agent starts asking a bunch of questions to help diagnose the issues. So then based on that conversation, we will send that to our AI system, and it's in real time. So as we get more and more information, we can narrow down to more and more specific articles on how to solve that problem. So originally in the first part of the conversation, we might recommend a generic article. Oh, this is all the main 5 problems that you can have on an Xbox. But then as the customer starts mentioning all specific things like this light is on and this thing won't turn on, then based on that additional information, we might recommend more specific examples, or we might recommend other cases where customers have had the same issues. And then the agent could then look at that article, either link it to the customer to help them solve it, or look at it, figure out what they need to recommend to the customer, and then essentially solve their problem.
And all this is happening in real time in the conversation. So you're translating, transcribing, and running it through
Yeah,
the
it's all
document.
happening in real time. It was multilingual, so we could do it in a bunch of different languages. And yeah, it was a pretty cool project to work on. Yeah.
Really, really important for customer support agents. They get harassed. They get angry customers calling in, and they're trying to placate the situation,
Yeah.
calm them down, but also solve the problem. And so
Yes.
anything to support them is going to really improve not only their experience but even the customer experience, right?
Yeah, and on that note as well, we also, another project that I worked on that was running simultaneously to this was sentiment analysis. So we could actually detect how the customer was feeling throughout the conversation. And if things were getting heated or they were getting angry, we could bring on a supervisor, we could redirect, there were different actions that we could take based on their sentiment to how the conversation was going.
I have a quick question for both of you guys. So fascinating, and Avi talked about this too. Large language models and ChatGPT and GPUs and all that jargon probably didn't have a lot to do with what you did there. But I'm curious for our audience, given the currency of the world today. So, what would capabilities that you're aware of that generative AI could offer to what you just did? What incremental value could something like that bring to that solution that it doesn't have today? Because a lot of people will hear what you just said, oh, that just sounds like ChatGPT. Of course, it's not, but like that's the certain people have yet to really understand that. So I'm just curious, but even what you both think, both Avi and you, Ruth. But you go ahead, Ruth, first. Maybe.
Yeah, so at that point in time, we were using language models, not large language models like GPT, but different language models. The main difference at that point in time was that they were designed and fine-tuned for specific tasks. So we had specifically designed the large language model to do this specific task. I think with GPT, what that brings is it's a lot more generic. So you don't necessarily need to say, hey, this is the one task you're going to do. It can perform multiple tasks throughout the conversation. So I think it will bring that you could probably do a lot more different things, but it's not necessarily as fine-tuned for this specific scenario.
And probably not, and given the current state of play, maybe not as accurate either, because it's not specific to those types of questions, which is
potentially not
a current issue. Yeah. What about you, Avi? What do you think could be done in that context? Because Salesforce, every customer service application currently has an AI function that's similar to that, but yet it's not.
It's
GPT.
not, and it really depends on how well is it tailored to the problem that you're trying to solve, right? So domain context matters a lot. So large language models, they're trained to be foundational and general across multiple domains, as Ruth said. It's really important to fine tune them. There are techniques like RAG, where you are looking to use LLMs to structure the process of going through and finding stuff, where you're querying a database to find the articles and then analyzing, summarizing, and then surfacing it. But it's going to be very context dependent, and best solutions are going to be the ones which are really targeted. So, and then the space is evolving rapidly, but what hasn't changed is the fundamental needs that need to be solved.
Yeah, I almost feel like you keep talking about AI and its its origins in the 1950s, and the Turing test about how something indistinguishable from a human is artificially intelligent, right? So it's like that's what it means. I almost feel as if like I am a GPT for, say, motorcycle maintenance, right? I can tell you all about it, but and the next person you talk to can tell you all about it, but we would say completely different things. And that's almost exactly kind of what Ruth said, was that it's like, like that. And I can be really convincing, and you can think of me as your best friend. But what you really want is, you want the mechanic who's certified and has been trained in motorcycle maintenance and knows exactly what to do for your motorcycle, because that individual is going to give you the best and safest advice, versus me that's going to make you feel good about a variety of things, maybe that too. If you want to diverge into like a related category like cars or boats or airplanes, whatever, like, hey, that sounds fun, let's talk about that. It's almost as if the GPD sort of method is a little bit like this, which again is in line with this idea of trying to create the system indistinguishable from a human being in many respects. But it also suggests that in every instance, it's going to be very unique. It's going to be very difficult, which leads to this future where you're going to have like, Avi GPT. He can talk about a lot of things, but you really want to talk to him about data science, and Ruth, you want to talk to her about, software development, you know what I mean? It almost leads us down the path. The more general it is, then the least likely it is to maybe be as expert, or perhaps that's the future, the expert that knows everything.
Yes and no, and part of it, I agree with you, Gib. It's going to be very, very personalized in terms of end users. I mean, foundational models are important to be able to learn the language. I see GPT, ChatGPT, large language models, or others, transformer models. They're really a tool. They're not the end product. They shouldn't be seen as the end product. They should only be seen as a enhancement to existing capabilities, products, and experiences. So I see large language models being revolutionary in terms of the interface, which is moving away from having an interface of tens of thousands of buttons. Do you remember this old sort of graphic that Microsoft Word had? Like the toolbar was going manic, and like there were all buttons all over the place, and there's only tiny space left over in the screen to type stuff. And of course, they changed it. It was an exaggeration, but that's one of the places where I think generative models can change the experience. Where now you talk to it and it figures out what to do, rather than you having to figure out the right button and the right menu and the right action to take. I think that's a big sort of a space. What do you think, Ruth? Do you think ChatGPT and LLMs changing the dynamics of products and software?
Yeah, I definitely see it moving that way. I'm noticing a lot more tools out there that are just a chat interface. And so, yeah, I definitely see it. I've noticed already moving in that direction for sure.
We might actually have the Star Trek sort of experience very soon, right? You just talk to it, or Jarvis experience from Iron Man is where now that becomes a feasibility. But is Jarvis the null Oracle, or Jarvis simply a translator for the human to the machine, right? And that's where I think people are often confounded to it. Artificial general intelligence, which is all encompassing and understands everything, that's I think is still a little far off, even though we'll see glimpses of it in other tools.
Yeah, no, I agree with that a lot. I think, as these tools get better and better, it's really easy to just think that, oh, they know everything. I can ask them anything. I can trust whatever they say. Give me 1 minute. But I think like we really do still need to treat some of what they say with skepticism. I think in a lot of the tools that we're building, especially things where the output is really, really important. I think having some kind of human in the loop sort of approach is also could be quite handy. So, for example, like a human in the loop is more of a collaborative approach between the humans and the AI, and where they work together to essentially do whatever outcome needs to be done. So the humans will provide the guidance, the feedback, the expertise, but the AI can handle tasks that require like speed or accuracy or scale, essentially. So an example of this, I think, is like if you're trying to detect diseases from certain scans. I think we may get to the point where you can just run it through some kind of large model, large language model, large image processing model, and they're just like, yes, disease, no, not disease. But, we can't necessarily trust everything they say without any kind of skepticism. So I think having that human in the loop where if you have, rather than a doctor having to review 100 scans, you have the AI review like those 100 scans and recommend, these are the five that I think have the disease. These are 5 that I think probably don't have the disease, but I'm not confident. And then the doctor then reviews those 10 scans instead of having to review all 100. So it can increase efficiency. It can sort of be used for that purpose, but not necessarily, we don't necessarily want an AI model telling patients that they have cancer without having any kind of oversight.
Yeah, I see AI as a best analogy I saw was someone describe it as a toddler with superhuman powers, right? And so they've got incredible capabilities to mine through large volumes of data, but their ability to consider different factors and make a decision, that's a level of right now at a toddler we will get to a 5 or 6 year old very soon, and then another 10, but it'll be a while before we get to a place. But fundamentally, it's all about what do you get out of it, right? So Gib, from your perspective, working with organizations, AI is a tool in service to certain business outcomes. What do you think are really important from business perspective, and do these priorities change with AI capabilities?
I mean, I like Ruth's example of the customer service agent because having worked at Salesforce, like I mentioned, Service Cloud and other customer service applications now embed these types of capabilities. What's interesting is that AI has been around, as you said, since the 1950s in various forms, but it really started to become prominent sometime within the past 5 to 10 years. And I'm sure you could Google it or ChatGPT it to find out, like, when did exactly this become such a mainstream thing that everyone was talking about? Well, not that they're solely responsible for this, but around 2016, 2017, Salesforce said something like, well, you know what, analytics is hard, AI is cool, has potential value, but let's abstract its complexity and make it an application in a business application so that you can point your sales reps to the highest propensity leads to close, to prioritize your day, or do case management for customer service and help people find answers quickly so that you don't have to have a human being necessarily do it. So you can triage those cases, have the highest value customers assigned to people, things like this. So it gets embedded, it gets abstracted. And you think this is extremely, effective and popular. And in fact, the company would often cite I don't know if it was billions, but it was a huge number of decisions or recommendations or predictions that were being generated by these capabilities across the entire portfolio of stuff that Salesforce could sell you. Yet, having worked in customer success, I found a lot of customers were not really implementing a lot of these functions. And then, having done some research myself among certain segments, I found that this was actually the case, and that despite those public messages, that in fact it wasn't always clear that the companies were actually using these functions. And so you dig into it further and you figure out, interestingly and not surprisingly, a lot of the users of business applications in a company aren't analytics professionals and data professionals. And so when presented with, machine learning and AI functions as compelling reasons to upgrade and buy and the like, it's a new thing. And so if you're not really comfortable with that, you're gonna have to learn it, first of all. And then it doesn't help you very much if you go to the help system and you see a bunch of information about caveats and things of this nature. Anyway, after spending 5 minutes in that, any average worker is going to say, I can't do that. I don't understand it, let alone want to put it into place and then have to stand behind it because I don't understand it. And that's just generally speaking, kind of that's what I discovered was often the case. So from an adoption perspective, on one hand, it makes sense to kind of put these things and abstract the complexity into the things that people use every day. And yet, at the same time, if it's left to people to actually put it into place, workers, if they're not comfortable and understand it, they're not going to do it. And so I think what Salesforce did was a benefit to the analytics space because, honestly, BI and data warehousing and reporting, it's kind of gotten stale, right? It's sort of like, companies struggle with this today. They still don't understand the fundamentals of their business, let alone being able to predict outcomes and like churn or what offer to offer customers, or how to be more like Amazon. But I think they did a service to companies, but at the same time, they highlighted the fact that workers themselves, may not want to be citizen developers, right? And so in this instance, I bring this up just because what I found among customers of business applications is that oftentimes the citizen developer equivalent is not even in the loop in here. They're off somewhere else doing something else. Maybe the business users of, could be an ERP application, it could be a marketing application, rely on those people occasionally. Give me this report, give me this segmentation, tell me what happened, but they're not working together. And so it highlighted to me that those individuals who are the closest thing to a data scientist that you could probably get to be included in your work would be the ones that would help you understand more about this and de-risk it. But again, it kind of points back to, well, somebody in a management role is going to have to highlight this and say, okay, well, we need to bring this together. We need to put a plan in place and, make sure that we're tracking it and we're improving. And so to your prioritization question, that's one of the things I was doing at Salesforce, was trying to advocate for this idea that you want to prioritize your use cases, but you also have to prioritize what you're trying to improve and make sure that you're measuring it and the like. And these were concepts that were not really anywhere in the fundamentals of what we were selling or we're trying to have customers use and get value from. It was just more about AI is amazing and you should be doing, we should be doing recommendations and predictions, and Einstein is the thing that you want. And, is this superficially not really helpful, really. And so I think that there is a huge opportunity. Now, what you said was very interesting is that, with ChatGPT being a command line, not a command line, like a search bar, basically type in your question. It's kind of the inverse to sort of the application of AI in a customer service context, where I don't have to answer anything. But it's like the next evolution of analytics is being able to bring the user closer to the ability to not just be told what to do, but to be able to ask questions that are really top of mind and be able to iteratively kind of go through that process and have the system kind of start to understand exactly what you're trying to get at and help you as if it were a person. And so it is kind of a natural evolution, and it just takes time to get to a point where people are comfortable with it and can trust it and put it into place. Because eventually what happens is that just instead of what about a system that actually uses the ChatGPT? Like, what about, instead of a person, what about a system itself, like that's submitting questions to the system, right? Like, who knows, right? There's some weird sort of things that could possibly happen here, but it's sort of like that's where things are heading. But it also just illustrates too that it's just a magnitude more complex and uncertain, especially like you talk about RAG databases and things like this. A pre-sales engineer mentioned that to me for the first time early in the ChatGPT thing, and I had to go look it up and figure out what that meant, and understood that in my own exploration of this stuff that I see that it's really the ability to interpret what you're actually trying to get at, so that you're honing in on customer service interactions and being able to put into context those answers within that construct. So that's part of the whole thing. As a business person, do I need to understand that? Probably not. But at the same time, if I'm in charge of trying to do something innovative in a pilot program from the business perspective, I would like to kind of have a sense for this stuff, because, man, we use Excel and I love my Tableau reports, but like what you're talking about here is foreign to me. So I don't really understand it, and I don't want to have to be accountable to my CEO and say something like, I don't know why that happened.
There's almost a gap between like promise of AI and capabilities, but also the confidence that business teams and leadership have on able to articulate and use it. Like, firstly, understand it, and to your point, right? No one's gonna put their neck out on the line to support a decision that they can't justify. And so, transparency is super important. That's one of the core important tenets of our design at Berrijam AI. The product Ruth and I have been building is to make sure we have clear box AI, where it's, no matter how you get to the result or the analytics or recommendations that we offer are something that someone in business can easily understand, replicate, validate, and test out without needing to understand the AI, how it got there, right? So if they can quantify and validate the insights and have some confidence in that, then they can make a decision on it. But Ruth, within the teams that you're working with, there is obviously the super technical folks who get it, and then there's the business teams and the product managers and so forth. The challenges any challenges you observed in their ability to communicate and work together towards that business outcome?
I didn't necessarily notice that as much. I think, in a lot of the teams that I worked on, everyone was quite technical. So there was less of that sort of, I think most people understood what was going on, but they have definitely noticed, building Berrijam as well, and trying to convince like, oh, this would be really useful for you and your business. Their understanding of just general people with businesses, of like, why will this be helpful for me? Like, what do I need to do? Like, I don't understand anything. How can I trust this? I think that piece has definitely been a challenge. I think that education piece is, definitely been a big challenge.
Education is really tough, especially outside of large organizations with deep pockets and deep teams. Like,
Yeah.
Microsoft is one of the leaders in the space, large, very, very talented technical folks. But when you step outside of the top 1% of the companies, or even the top 10, top 0.5% of the companies in the world, it gets really, really tough. I've seen this again and again. Gib, you worked with a few organizations. Did you see the the challenges? Or is there excitement in that space on how they want to use AI
Sure.
within an organization?
Sure. I mean, I think it's very interesting here. So details matter in product design, just like it's kind of goes without saying. But what this conversation just highlights to me, brand new thought in my head here, is just how technology companies would love to be able to sell everyone the capacity to apply machine learning to all sorts of problems, get tons of value, right? So that's a market unto itself, and there are lots of products in that space, and arguably Berrijam might want to try to exist in that space. But the details matter, and so it's sort of like, well, who are you helping, and how are you helping them, right? Are you helping somebody who isn't a data scientist understand, why a particular model may be better suited for this problem? And are you talking about the features of the model that are most pertinent, and basically trying to educate them along those lines, sort of like teach them lightweight data science in a way that they're going to be able to grasp how to use this stuff? Maybe. However, I say that only because it's been largely done. But on the inverse, it's sort of like, is that really what people want? Or is it really more about being led down a path of applying machine learning in a context for themselves, for their business problem, which, might be more business question oriented and led. And I think I've seen that sort of more of the way that you've manifested it in what you're trying to do. So
Mhm.
I suspect that the larger market is for things like this, which is interesting because what it does is it kind of comes full circle back to Ruth's example of saying it really needs to be transparent, and work and provably work, right? So it's sort of like you implement the customer service chatbot that basically takes a few things and then starts giving you more nuggets and helps resolve your case so that you don't have to talk to somebody. Well, that's going to work or not, and you're going to measure it, right? And so as long as what's being built in a business context for machine learning and AI can be proven work, only way you know that is if you're measuring things from a baseline, you're testing it, you're rolling it out into production. Then you're gonna do those sorts of things. But if you're not gonna think that way, it's gonna be a bit of a struggle. So I think that the details matter. And so yeah, I mean I've been in the space a long time, and of course on the technology side, there's lots of different tools and technologies and companies that want to help data scientists be more productive and do their jobs easier. Don't worry about data related issues. Data, consumes 80% of every data science project. So let's reduce the time there so you can spend time over here thinking about what you're going to do. Great. But that's not helping a business person do anything. It's really helping that data scientist do more work with their business people, which is a function of who they are and their management and their organization and how close they are and design. The point of what I'm saying here is that it just shows how complicated it is to get this right, and it all points back to all that research that people do. That it comes down to leadership and organizational considerations that separate people that do this really well from those that don't. It's
And even with the technical folks, right, the expertise that they have is so narrowly focused that sometimes it's challenging for them to articulate it. And we notice it again and again. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of different ML techniques and AI techniques and data science techniques. And how do you make it relevant and accessible for business? And at Berrijam, we've been thinking about this problem a lot, right? How do we simplify it? And the way we found was not to talk about a specific algorithm, specific technique, or large language model or GPT, but think a little bit about the kind of capabilities that you can unlock using these tools and strategies and techniques. So we have these five broad types of AI capabilities, right? The first one is find. Can you find? So you're all familiar with Google search. Ruth's example of the real time document extraction and recommendation. That's an element of find. Can you find the right document in thousands, if not millions, of articles to surface in real time? The other one is make. Making is generating new stuff, right? So you have generative AI to generate text, music, art, video. Third one is connect. That's another example where you're trying to find relationships between different factors. What Ruth found with the churn problem was finding an interesting characteristic, and that gives people insights to take actions on. The fourth capability is predict, making a prediction about the future or the unknown. Where should I be? What product someone would like? Likelihood someone of a machine failing or a patient being readmitted, whatever. And the fifth one is optimize. Optimize multiple constraints around it. So we did some work recently with a pet logistic company based out of Chicago. They've got a problem where they've got to load the right dog in the right crate at the right time and make sure that they arrive and safely from their home to daycare and then back home. And it's a complex optimization problem. But from an operator of that doggy daycare wouldn't see it as a mathematical optimization problem, right? So we built a sort of a solution that now does it in less than 5 minutes as opposed to 1 hour of planning. So find, make, connect, predict, and optimize. Those are sort of like capabilities that AI can help, that's relevant to business. And sometimes it's a combination of these, right? It's not just one by itself, but it's a combination of multiple of these. If you were to frame this to a business audience, then it starts to become easier to grasp in the role AI can play within an organization. But at the end of the day, it still has to connect to two things, right? It's going to connect to revenue or margins, right? You grow your business or you increase your margins. Ruth, do you have to make any of these business cases to your teams? They were pretty savvy and they got it?
I think the biggest thing we had to do was show impact, show how what we were doing would actually impact, basically impact the bottom line. So we can only build this feature if we show there's going to be an impact of building this feature. So a lot of it was around, we did some experimentation. So we were like, these are the baseline numbers before we build this feature. Now let's build this feature and show, the numbers afterwards, and then see, if we release this feature to this group of customers and we don't release it to this group of customers, are we seeing increased revenue from the group of customers that have this feature? Are we seeing increased efficiency from the customer service agents? So actually, I think this goes back to what Gib was saying. Being able to measure the impact of what these what this AI is doing is really important.
And there's almost like an A/B experimentation methodology there, right? You've got an idea, you test it out, then you go next iteration, and each time you're measuring the impact.
Yeah.
That's fundamental to winning up the confidence. But also stories matter, right? Stories, how that personal experience might feel like for people.
Yeah, so it's not just pure numbers. It's, walking through the leadership team an example of, here's this customer service agent solving this problem without any help from the AI. So they can see, okay, this customer service agent is now going into the knowledge base, searching for different terms, trying to find the right article, not necessarily finding what they're looking for, now having to go and look through all the past cases. Which one? I remember maybe I solved this case 3 weeks ago, but now I can't find which case, I can't find it. So having to find that and looking at that, seeing how long that takes compared to having this system where, within 30 seconds, we recommend one relevant article. And then within a minute, we've recommended the actual, article that solves this problem. So trying to show those differences, tell the stories around that impact in that sense also made a really big difference.
That's a really cool idea. You almost like do a contrast without and let the decision maker experience all of this, because then they can actually translate and understand the pain or the inefficiencies or different.
They can see, okay, this has taken the customer service agent 2 minutes to help this customer as opposed to 20 minutes and still not getting, the best customer experience. And that, again, translates to the bottom line. If they can solve this in 2 minutes, they can help so many more customers. It can just make them a lot more efficient.
Yeah. Gib, in terms of making a solid business case for decision makers, how would you even formulate it? Like, let's assume you have some preliminary numbers. What's the easiest way you have found to demonstrate business value?
I mean, Ruth touched on it right there. So in that context there's somebody head of customer care, customer service, customer support, and they've got metrics around resolution times and customer satisfaction and retention and, potentially cross-sell, upsell if they're a more progressive company, and using that channel to identify not just opportunities to retain customers, but maybe sell them additional products. We're all, cross-sold things on the line waiting to speak with somebody. So, I mean, looking through that is of course important, but then obviously on the full-time equivalent or the time saved piece of it relative to the current state, that's obviously equals money. But what's interesting too is that, and especially about the other case with the product build, is that the implications here are extensive, because you think about complicated products, multi-source, inputs, etc. There's supply chain implications, supplier implications, and there's implications to your strategy around sourcing sustainable inputs and the like. So it's very interesting when you do this isolated case around, well, what product features should we build, or what customers should we help, and how should we help them? It starts to really spread out, because then a certain segment of your customers are most valuable. So you should recognize them upon entry and put them in touch with a person if that's what they want immediately, because you want to retain them. Somebody who's like brand new, who won't self-identify, who may be using expletives, well, put them through the self managed path potentially, or if they're a high value customer, put them over here, because ultimately you want to retain your higher value customers. You want to because they're going to be more valuable over time, and so that has implications to the CEO and other people outside of that function. So I think that when you make the business case, it's about obviously time saved and costs efficiencies. It's about improving your metrics from the current state, but it could be more broadly have implications, and it also just helps elevate the importance of analytics. And so whoever's in charge of that project, or if there's a chief data or analytics officer, you want to latch onto this and start talking to other people and say, look, this project has implications throughout the business. It ripples through here and has implications there. I want you to be part of that. Let us know what you think of that. And that's that's just part of the whole data-driven culture thing, that when you get people thinking like this, then that person hears you say that and they think, that's interesting. Yeah, I would like to know this or that or the other thing, or this is how I'm measured, and here's how I would like to see this affect me. I think that's an underlooked point. I think oftentimes it is more focused just on the very specific narrow case.
Yeah, and the metrics matter and differ, right? I remember when we were doing recommendations at Amazon, we built a brand new algorithm to use recommend movies, and that was our first test, right? And we were getting, my team was really surprised how strong the recommendations were even our offline testing, and we were sort of confused about, like, is this real or not? We had to go and test it. But what's interesting is if you looked at the metrics, you have to not look at one metric, you have to look at multiple in cohort, right? So one of the interesting things is it was actually cannibalizing from the actual orders, because people liked the movies we were recommending and they were watching it and actually not doing other stuff, not shopping as much, right? And so that was like, or stealing from the TV shows, that instead of spending that much time on TV shows, now you were actually watching movies, right? Movies are longer investments. And so, if you look purely on the number of, oh my God, of cannibalizing TV streaming sales versus video sales, then it looks bad. But what you have to, we still decided to promote it because we realized that the recommendations were good. People liked them. And that's why they were taking those. And so that became the fundamental algorithm for other forms of recommendation, other products. But the value was customer experience and engagement and benefit, right? Why would you take away something? Yes, it looks bad in the initial bottom line, but why would you take something that's actually customers delighted in? Because you want to build a customer relationship and a long-term engagement. Ruth, we talk about these systems and the customers that I know we've built products at Amazon and Microsoft. Talk a little bit about the scale at which some of these things can operate, both at the small end or the large end.
Yeah, so yeah, I've got a lot of thankfully got a lot of experience at the very small end and at the very large end working at Microsoft. So on the small end, when I was working in the HoloLens team, we were building business applications for the HoloLens. So this was a really new technology. It didn't have a lot of adoption. So we were doing, data science AI at the scale of maybe a few hundred customers. And then on the other end of the scale, when I was working in the Windows Photos app, we had, I think it was like 200 million monthly active customers. So we were doing, analysis at that scale. In the Dynamics customer service team, we started off doing with working with customers who had maybe a corpus of, a few thousand articles. And then at one point we're looking at onboarding Microsoft onto the same system, and they had, in the realm of like tens of millions of articles. So there's a lot of different problems that you encounter at the different scales. So at the smaller scale, getting enough sort of statistical significance to actually make decisions, that's a big problem. And then at the larger scale, just the time that it takes to do anything at that scale. So for this recommendation system, we would have to process every article before they could use the system. And if each article takes 3 seconds, when there's a few thousand articles, that's okay. But when there's 30 million articles and each takes 3 seconds, that I think that's over a month's time. So, it starts growing, and you have to look at different optimization techniques and different ways to sort of solve these different problems at different scales.
Now, this
Can I
is
ask Ruth a quick question on when you were working with the Microsoft Dynamics team? I'm just curious. I heard this from a chief data officer at Salesforce who said that one of the challenges that they had, or he had at the time, was that the idea behind AI in business applications was that you had to create something one time that could be deployed to millions of users potentially and be applicable and provide value to them. And he said that was always a struggle and challenge because it limited largely how valuable it could be potentially because it had to be so generic. I'm just curious with Microsoft Dynamics being kind of a parallel sort of thing to Salesforce in some respects, if you ever heard anything like that there, and is that a real thing or did I misunderstand it?
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
So I think the key concept that I think worked for us was if you're trying to build something for everybody, you're going to end up building something for nobody. If you're trying to put in every single feature and every single thing that you think any potential customer could potentially want, it's going to be a big mess of everything. So what we usually did was pick who our key customers were, maybe 3 personas of these were our key customers that we want to build this product for. And what we generally found was, that was enough that it actually was applicable for most customers.
Yeah, because adoption is so important to, as somebody wanting to help people, take advantage of this stuff, getting people to actually use it and see the value is so important. So yeah, rather than trying to build something that you can immediately send an email to 1 million people and hope that some percentage acquire it, do it much more specific to a slice of that, but the majority of them will use it because it's been tailor made. That's really an interesting way to think about it, I think.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, Ruth. I was just going to say, and even at Berrijam, we do this, right? If you look at the pet care company that we build a custom ML AI solution for, it's very, very narrow. I mean, there are not many pet care companies, but they see an immediate benefit of it. Ruth, you wanted to add something?
I think I was just going to add that, yeah, even though you're sort of tailoring it for this specific customer, what you tend to find is that a lot of customers actually have similar needs. I think, similar to like the churn problem, like every business has that churn problem. There's a lot of problems that they may seem specific to this particular customer, but there's something similar that another customer faces that can also be solved with this problem.
Makes sense.
Yeah, the end user experience is where the personalization really happens. So but the fundamental, that's why framing it in terms of capabilities helps to say, okay, this is the type of capability that we need. Look, I know we've been talking for a while and we've gone through lots of interesting things. I want to try and bring it home together. There's some interesting opportunities in how people can use AI at 100 customers or hundreds of millions of customers level. Like you've seen that. There's capabilities and examples of the value from customer churn to improving the experience of your employees. So there's both employee side of it and customer side of it and operation side of it and growth of revenue side of it. So there's different applications of it. It also is important to think about AI in context of capabilities that a business needs. Fundamentally, you're going to be solving business problems and you want to try and address the gaps that we have with sort of talent and capabilities within organizations. And of course, there's hundreds of examples, and we can keep talking about it. But it's important for the organization to look at the examples that are specific to its operations. And a company can't just take what someone did at another company and just copy, paste, and apply to their company. They have to think about their priorities and their problems. Microsoft's priorities were different. Their priorities from even HoloLens were very different to photos, were different to dynamics. And for each of their business functions, they started with what they needed first and then work backwards to the solution and then the algorithms and the deployments. And so with all the excitement around AI and ChatGPT and LLMs and machine learning and data science, it's easy to get lost in that sea. And the easiest way to find and ground yourself is to work backwards. Ruth, any other comments and thoughts on this particular topic?
No, I just very much agree with what you said. It's very easy to just find a cool new technology and be like, how can I apply this? And then just try and figure out how to apply that. But that really, in that case, you just really end up building something that doesn't necessarily solve any of the problems. So really starting from your problem, starting from what's important to you, and then working towards finding a solution for that. And not every solution needs like the fancy new large language model. Some, there's a lot of techniques that have been going back since the 50s that just as applicable and can solve a lot of the problems. So starting with the problem is really the most important.
Wonderful. Anything else to add, Gib?
I can only imagine, though, that this explains why people like you guys are so demanded and will be in demand, because expertise is necessary, right? And whether it's embodied in a product or person, this episode really helps explain why I'd want you, like, with my company helping me here, because you need smart people. So that's it.
Indeed, and look, I'm glad we had this topic to talk about. I mean, there's so much that we can go in deeper, and that's, if anyone have any questions for Ruth, for myself, or for Gib, don't hesitate. Just drop us a little comment or a note. And if ever in doubt and just want to reach with us, just reach out and send an email to jam, JAM at berrijam.com, and we'll go from there. Thanks, Ruth. Thanks, Gib, for joining us today.
Bye-bye.
Bye.